Okay, so this is a video where I talk through the sort of the TypeScript website and try and cover like all the different parts of it. You're going to be seeing me chatting with the rest of the TypeScript team. The TypeScript team is kind of two teams, the compiler team and then the sort of TypeScript JavaScript team. They do all this amazing work with Visual Studio, and chances are you might not have heard of their work. So let me just get straight to it. Chat. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to a guided site tour of the website. I'm going to try and talk through like a bunch of different sort of abstractions inside the code, as well as sort of how things are built and why things are built in a particular way, as well as trying to give you an overview of all of the different places that like the site kind of touches. So the place where I figured would be a good start was actually to cover the roadmap. So one way to help everybody understand what I was trying to build and where it was going to be was create this sort of website roadmap issue, which everything I'm doing here is in the open, so you should be able to see it all. It provides like an overview of what's going to get built, as well as like what is and has been built already, as well as talking through some of the design changes and some of the aspects of how they work and why they work the way they are. So this has been sort of like a larger overview of every single part that I felt was like needed for our documentation, so that I've got something that I can eventually keep pointing at and saying like, this is the thing I'm working on this month. Here are all these different pieces, to be able to sort of, you know, show people that some progress is happening and it's not just me living off in a vacuum doing nothing. I know, right? Because I am kind of in a vacuum, just like giving myself pull requests. So one of the ways that I try to sort of counterbalance that problem is by having an update thread, which I started in November. And what this does is every 2 weeks, I do a large write-up with a cute GIF of what has happened in the last 2 weeks.
Is that GIF relevant to
these are like super extensive. Yeah, the pandas are totally relevant. It's a playground.
Did you make that?
No, not that one, but I definitely did a few of them further down. Some good ones are like, you know, this one talks about the design versus mobile versus desktop, and like why it was designed in such a way on the desktop instead of on the mobile, as well as trying to provide a bunch of useful information. Some of the cool ones that I did that were my own GIFs are like much further down. So it's like, you keep using that compiler flag. I do not think it means what you think it means. And so that was when I was working on the tsconfig reference. And this is like a really nice way to sort of understand why something was built, whereas the roadmap already talked about how it will be built and what it should be at the end of the day. So this is a good overview of every single tiny piece that's ever changed as well, too, if you want to keep on top. Because this is a GitHub issue, you can actually subscribe to it. So there's just a button here. I'm not logged in because this is a fresh browser, but you can subscribe and they just automatically go into our web channel anyway. Okay, so how I started this was when I first joined, I started speccing out what a sort of revised version of the playground would look like, which is what you're seeing here. This is like one of the first designs I did to sort of get a sense for how it all could look and feel. And then a little bit further along, I sort of specced out like, yeah, I think these are the colors and the shapes and like the sort of design aesthetics that I'm going for like what TypeScript should look and feel like. This is based on Microsoft's Fluid design system, which is now a all over design Twitter. So it fits with what Microsoft is doing, as well as fitting with what VS Code is doing, as well as fitting with like the TypeScript aesthetic itself from the older website. Once I had a feel for this, I ended up moving to the sort of documentation page. So this is like, you know, it kind of represents what most people will be spending most of their time on for TypeScript, and to try and think of like what parts of the documentation page do we want from the old one? What sort of navigational elements are people looking for? So that ranges from like searching to sort of being able to filter along things like the handbooks when they're looking for something very specific. to like how do we want to show code and what are the ways in which we should be showing like highlights and sort of providing richer metadata in terms of like contextual highlights inside code. So I'll dig into that a little bit later again when we get back to some of the sort of tools that had to be built to make the TypeScript website work. So that was sort of like the design phase. During that time, I was sort of evaluating a few different sort of static site generators. The one that I ended up sticking with is called Gatsby. I kind of cheated because I'd already done a lot of this sort of what sort of way should you power a TypeScript website statically already, because I needed that for artsy. But Gatsby is a static site generator, which means it generates a collection of HTML and CSS files. But it does one thing really well. I think my own explanation is very good, so I'll just reuse that. On the Gatsby website, I recently wrote a blog post saying why we're doing this. The key concept here is this idea. So most normal static site generators just take a list of files and they convert that file with a sort of template generator, and then they output another file. What Gatsby does, on the other hand, is it says, take all these files, turn that into an internal API, and then make calls to this internal API to generate new pages. And that separation concept actually allows you to have a ton of new work in the middle, in between. I can actually show you because I've got it running right now. So if we look, this beautiful community page, which is definitely not done, so don't judge it. Oh, cool feature though. It shows you the upcoming meetups. So these are all the meetups that are happening pretty soon. And every time it's deployed, it gets a new version of these meetups and shows you what's going on.
Where are those sourced from?
These are sourced from inside the TypeScript repo. There's a list of meetups. It's easy to show you this way. If you look in here, we keep track under connect of a bunch of meetups. People submit them. If they go to a meetup.com page, then we can pull out the upcoming events by looking at the calendars for these events. So it just matches the URL to this calendar link somewhere in here, and then pulls it all together. So every time the TypeScript website gets deployed, which you'll find out later is every single day, then this will get updated every single day. And when there's nothing, it shows nothing. When there's stuff, it shows stuff. But the interesting thing here is this GraphQL. So this is the API to the website, which if you've heard Ryan complaining out loud, you probably hear him talking about GraphQL in some sense. With like, that's how he works with GitHub's API now. But if you've never used GraphQL, effectively it's a typed API system, which is why people that use GraphQL love TypeScript, because you can have TypeScript on one side, GraphQL in the middle, and then TypeScript on the other side, and you've got a fully typed API connection. And so I can see what's going on in here, and I can make new requests. If you've never seen this before, it's okay, don't worry about it too much, but you can see that it's made a request for fields, even though nothing is actually returned in this side. So Gatsby,
so,
yeah, sure.
So Gatsby itself creates a GraphQL endpoint for when it's generating the site. In some sense, is that what's happening there?
Yeah. So think of it as Gatsby creates a GraphQL API, and then separately, it starts creating your pages by querying that GraphQL API.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a one-time GraphQL server that doesn't exist once you deploy it. So once it's deployed, it's just pure HTML files, and it's like I can run the TypeScript website without JavaScript enabled and things like that. But during dev time, you can make direct queries to this GraphQL API.
Nice.
So that's how GraphQL, that's how the Gatsby GraphQL works. So let's take a look at some of the code. So the TypeScript website for V2 is a Yarn monorepo, which if you've never used one before, the only real structural thing it kind of requires is that you have a package.json in the root, and you have a list of packages in your packages folder. I'm really only doing this for like conceptual separation of concerns, not for any real need for like putting everything in different places. Like right now I'm not shipping any of these to npm, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I see it is that like any sort of chunk of content should get its own sort of package in this monorepo, which is why you've got things like the handbook version 1, playground examples, and the tsconfig reference. These are all just text. So like the handbook v1 is just a package.json and an English file. And there's just all the markdown files directly from the original handbook. So I literally copied and pasted these in, and all I did extra is just add a bit of YAML at the top to describe the page that already exists. Mm-hmm. Which you can contrast to, say, the tsconfig reference, where it's got a few more sort of scripty things. But at the end of the day, it also just has a copy folder with different languages at the root. So like English, Japanese, and Vo, which is the language I use for testing things with. Yeah, if you didn't know, Vo language code. Vo is the least used language I could find in the world. Yep. This one.
Yeah. Where's it spoken?
Esperanto.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's like Esperanto but less popular.
Yeah, exactly. Esperanto but less popular.
So it's a hipster Esperanto.
No, that's Edo.
Users 20.
20.
20 users.
So I figured, yeah, maybe that's the language I can work with. So if I could show you a Vo page if you want. Vo/playground, I think should work. No.
Oh my God! Really?
Yeah.
Oh, is it tsconfig I did the work on? No. So yeah, so that works. There's no actual look. See how it's like Java and TypeScript here? I use it as a elite language, so I can at least see that things are working. So like hello world down here and objects and functions.
Are you familiar with pseudoloc?
No. What's that?
We basically, it's like an internal Microsoft thing.
I didn't think
so. I mean, all the other products I worked on, they basically generate, that. They add a bunch of like interesting concerns, something that's like
algo generation.
So it's human readable, but it's also exercise.
There's an at Microsoft.
Yeah, in Windows at Microsoft.
Wow. That's
okay.
Basically what you're doing.
Cool.
And
That's exactly what I'm doing.
that's all those strange Unicode ranges.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In Apple world, you would normally do like there's a mode to do double English language. So any string gets doubled to essentially say what it would be like in German. Okay, so that's generally how content sort of gets put around. The main TypeScript website is TypeScript.lang.org at the bottom. And what I'm going to show you is sort of just an empty page, basically, to give you a sense of what the code for any page looks like. So this page here is v2/empty, which I create as a sort of validate that the tooling system works. So it looks like this. So it's React. So if you've never used React, I'll give you a brief explanation, which is that, it jams HTML elements into JavaScript, which is why this is all legit. You probably should have heard of TSX. And one of the great things about it is that it has a single directional model of how you like pass variables through. So variables only ever go down the tree. There's all these really cool features that React has that I do not use at all. So I know my blog post goes into this, the why we use it, but roughly I use React here almost entirely throughout this as just a templating language. So all of this is like real legitimate React, but it never tries to use any of React's features other than sort of representing HTML at the end of the you know, at the end of the day, like a normal templating language. It doesn't use like, if I change this state here, it should propagate up through in these different places or with context and things like that. So anybody that has some HTML skills should be able to understand what's going on here without having to have deep React skills. And that was an explicit goal of mine. The other thing that it comes with is, so that is what the sort of root export of this page is. So the only thing that you see here and here is a layout. This page is intentionally left blank and like a class name that just wraps it. And then there's a GraphQL query at the bottom here. And what this does is, actually, we'll come back to that later when we talk a bit more about translations. But you can get a sense of like, there's some imports at the top, there's a React component, there's a query, and then they're all just exported out. And then it gets wrapped in internationalization wrapper at the end. So this is generally what most pages look like. They're just obviously more complicated with the amount of like HTML that sits inside them. And so we'll move to one that's got a bit more things going for it to give you a better sense of like what one really looks like. And so this page here represents, I was using, let's go to it this way. Slam v2, I think it's docs, nope, home, nope, we'll just click documentation. There we go. Got a current bug where it adds an extra v2. So this is this page, which sort of highlights all of the different sort of starter projects that you can use to jump into TypeScript. Again, like I tend to not worry about small design issues until the end, where it's just easier to just go through them all at once. So don't worry when you see those kind of things. This page itself is fully localized, and that's what makes it a little bit more complicated. So at the top, there's like 1 million imports now instead of a few. And at the top, we have this thing that's called iCreate International. So that uses some React hooks to effectively create a function that will do the language translations for us with a simple key value lookup, as well as saying that saying what keys should be available on it on a particular basis. So this page was entirely done by an internet rando. I just said, you know what, you want to do some translations? See if you can get this one translatable, and they just did it the next day. So that was a good win for me. On that subject, before I get too far into it, there's actually I'm starting to get to a point where my pull requests are getting dwarfed by the amount of translation pull requests that are going on in here, which is kind of cool. So I only do 1 or 2 a day, but now there's just constant Spanish and Japanese and Chinese PRs. The one on Chinese is getting really, really, really big. It's King WL, and he's just I know, he's done 50 odd translations already. It took me ages to write these originally, and he's just flying through them at a few a day.
Well, you don't know if they're accurate.
Probably accurate.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of people to audit them, so you can just see loads of different conversations about them. Because I always there's process around the translation stuff, which I'll go into a bit later. So this is all pretty simple. You provide a key and it gets the value back. And this is just a dumb, what page is this called? Documentation. Yeah. So it's just a simple exported object with key to value. And that makes it quite easy to keep on top of, just as simple code. Other than that, there's nothing too special in here. One of the nice things about this layout object here is that I use it everywhere, and it allows me to force myself to do better everywhere. So it's every page must have a meta description, every page must have a title, every page must specify its language too. Because I can use props to force that. If I can use the types definitions to force that, which keeps me doing the right thing properly. That's generally how all these that's generally what most pages look like. Once you start getting to something a bit more complicated, like the index page, then it's a series of pages. The index, and then that is just import these things. Here's a bunch of helpers for rows and columns. But then the overview should be generally quite simple. So you can just get a sense this one is the top index. this bit is what is JavaScript, and you can trust it, and that sort of this sort of like this. Yeah, so they directly correlate, and you're mostly just looking at the text there. There's your scroll bug, Daniel.
Sorry. I know you want to take care of it at the end, but I was like, oh, I should follow bug on that. Anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so there's some interesting things about how this translation works here. You see how this one is set up? We have index tools copy here, and then a list of sort of HTML tags. So it's like I write in the localization VS or VSC, add it over, and it actually turns it into the href here. So it's sort of one way to decouple the translation, the text that could be localized, and the sort of the TypeScript, not the TypeScript, the React output that you get from it. I'll show you the original, what the page looks like for the copy index. So that's what you write. So you're like the link to Visual Studio, and what that gives is each translation can put all these in different orders, and they can, if they need to, they can just create a new one of these that's specific for their own language that we can just add in that big dump that we saw of like different translations.
Wait, so it'll replace whatever. It'll find a tag with that tag name and replace whatever you have.
Yeah.
With the corresponding.
Yeah.
What is chunk in that case? Just curious. Or is that's the children?
Yeah, it's the children that all just get plopped into this, and then you pass it straight through. Yeah.
So in this case, like the children would be something like the word Visual Studio Code.
Yeah. So they could write. I mean, they're going to write Visual Studio Code on Visual Studio, but if that was localizable.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Good point. Think about it.
But maybe there's other language. Like if you're writing it in Chinese, maybe you don't. Maybe you still write it in English too.
Like maybe Sublime Text literally translates the text. I'm just kidding, but
yeah. So that's how some of those pieces work. It's an interesting pattern that has one or two constraints, especially because there's P. So these don't nest, so you can't really put paragraphs around things. I'm still talking with some of the Gatsby people about what the right answer is here, but I'm looking to do Markdown instead of these for very complicated sort of localizable chunks of code. Whew. Okay, let's look at some doc generation. So we've talked about some pretty normal text. So this is just text in paragraphs jammed together. When you're talking about something like the tsconfig, that gets a little bit more complicated. So jas/tsconfig. The TypeScript config has, nice, no thanks. The TypeScript config has like I think 150-ish little files that each need to be individually translated, which can be hard to keep track of anyway, but it can also just be hard to keep track of when I was trying to write all the documentation for the tsconfig. So the tsconfig reference is a very large collection of either categories and options, which all comes directly from the TypeScript compiler. So each one of these is an individual Markdown file that kind of describes just one individual compiler flag, as well as allowing you to separate out the display title from the flag title. So if you look at these, like it says check.js here, but it could I'm encouraging them to write this title here as localized to your own language, so that then you'll be able to use search in your own language to find out what the actual flag should be, and then you can see that directly maps to the official compiler flag ID.
Mm-hmm. What if you wanted to test some RTL language?
Yeah.
What languages were?
So right now I don't support any RTL languages, but that was the question I got first from someone at Gatsby. I've got a friend who's about to leave his job, and I'm going to persuade him to come and help me spend a few days like adding Farsi to the TypeScript language website, and that should probably help us address some of those problems.
I'm watching one help with that maybe. Anyway, I have thoughts. Keep going.
Yeah, I don't know what it looks like until we try add one. So we were going through docs generation, right? So what ends up happening is there are every single package in this monorepo has a build and a bootstrap and a test sort of command. And that allows me to run like, CI that validates all tests, have a simple bootstrap command that just bootstraps every single project. The bootstrap is useful because it can say like, these dependencies need to be built before I can be built. This one just built itself, but for some other ones, it's a little bit more complicated. But what this tends to do in nearly all of them is, let's see, packages, playground examples, cool. So they all generate like a generated folder, which sort of comes up with these little JSON files that kind of describe what's going on. So in this case, this is what the Spanish sections for the TypeScript, the playground examples look like. So you'll see those either at the bottom down here when it's got a wide screen. Let's see if I can trigger it. Still not wide enough. Ooh. Nope, that's not happening. My monitor's too small to show it down there. /play. Oops, /n/play. I'm still working with those URLs. So these things, it generates these section heads as well as generating like where to find all of this content. And so each one consistently will have a sort of generated folder that contains all of the sort of scripted constructed metadata, so that then it's consistent across every single project. So where to find all of the sort of generated metadata from these things. This is also the part in where I do translation, where it does fallback to English translation. You saw that in the TypeScript. You see that almost everywhere right now because no one's fully translated everything. But it goes back to English if it doesn't have the sort of Japanese, for example, here. And so these scripts are built to sort of say, take English and then apply Japanese on top of it, and then do the same for every language that we have. And that then gives you the chance to work incrementally and not force everybody to do all of the documentation, all the work straight away. Because that's then easily scripted, I have coordination issues. These issues are generated on a nightly basis, where it tells you what parts of the like actually localizable work is doable or has been done. So maybe that's better to show the Japanese one. There you go, because they've got some stuff done. And that just like it moves the ticks to the top, and then it shows you what's for each section, and it shows you what you've still got left to do. And this makes it easier for the translators to know what they need to do, as well as for me to have an overview of like, okay, this stuff is getting there and it's feeling pretty good. So they build this way, that goes into generated, cool. So the same thing as what I just showed you for the playground is the same as the tsconfig one, so that's not too much different. I think it's output here instead. Yeah, it's just a bunch of individual markdown files. So this makes one markdown file that represents the entire page. Because it's markdown, you can jam in like both HTML and markdown together. So that's how I can get the sort of design that I'd like at the expense of no one's ever going to read these because they're entirely machine generated. Okay, I've covered some internationalization. There's a long write-up on the internationalization that I did very recently. If you want to know a little bit more about how and why all that came together, it was my stretch goal for the half year. I can't remember how long, what we call those, your personal goals.
Connects.
Yes.
Resolution.
Yeah. So it's been my side project. So I've not had a side project in the past like few months because I've just been doing this. But this is a good overview of like of all of it. This most recent. Spent ages trying to find the right GIF, and then I found this by accident and was like, "That's perfect."
How do you find these?
Oh, I actually just go to Giphy and just searching around.
Okay.
I did once upon a time. I made my own app for this. Yeah. Can't remember what it's called. It's a really good app, but it was really hard to work on because it was so distracting. Like every time you iterated, you ended up seeing something cool again, and you just be like, "Oh, that's a good app. I'll start keeping track of those." Yeah, it was good. There we go. Look, what a beautiful Mac app.
Nice. Oh my god. Monetizes me.
and it used Reddit as well as Tumblr as well as Giphy search, so it was like really extensive. So that's what I used. And now I make my own. Actually, I've been using. It doesn't matter how few Mac users, so it doesn't matter. I'm using a Mac to record them and to overwrite with my own stuff. So it's like this one, Playground plugins. Just jams in some extra annotations on top of it to get a feel.
Oh no.
It's all these features people want for the playground that I'm like, I'm not building, do it yourself now. Okay, so we've got.
It's so pretty.
Okay, so some. I have a note, like some automation work. I do a lot of automation on almost everything. I've been trying to really use GitHub Actions for most of it. It turns out that the website didn't build on Windows, so as of this week, we now build the TypeScript website on Windows to prove that it works. But some of the interesting stuff is like there is this one here, this GitHub action. People should have seen in the web channel. It automatically takes anytime I write a comment in that issue with updates, and it specifically posts it into our web channel in the TypeScript team. And this is like really easy. This is just a little bit of JavaScript. You could copy and paste this onto anything. So there's like, I would recommend jamming more stuff into teams just by like copying and pasting this and finding different parts of things that you think are interesting. I have nightly builds, so this just every day it just updates that translation issue and then redeploys master to push to production again. So it automatically will update those things like the anything that requires like timeliness. So think about it as like when 3.8 came out, then all of the URLs needed to be updated for release for like NPM or for the Visual Studio Marketplace and NuGet stuff. So all of that got updated automatically because it just does that in the nightly. When I arrived, it was a pretty convoluted process to deploy the website. And so one of the first things I did was sort of move that to be on to be automated too. So I still.
How do you know what the latest marketplace link is right now? Do you just like query that on the marketplace API, or what do you?
Yeah, that's what I do. I query the API and just do script somewhere. It just basically pulls out. What is it? Being here. Yeah. So I just ask. So for VS, I ask marketplace at visualstudio.com and start narrowing down specifically based on our team, and then I actually do a second check with our current server major and latest from npm to validate that they're like all the right ones. So this ends up being like quite a lot of information. It generates a pretty solid JSON file, like release info.json. So that tells me this hasn't been updated yet because I don't need to run this every day. It tells you stable major min, data RCs, as well as like all of the different URLs that are related. as well as there being a release plan. So this one I update manually. So when we agree on the next dates, I'll go in and change all of these. And this is reflected on the index page, which tries to tell you like a little bit of information about the cycle for every TypeScript release.
Mm-hmm.
So it will do a head lookup for each one of these to see if the URLs exist, because we have a consistent naming structure for all of them, as well as giving you information about this. And because we're like here now, it doesn't show, but it would show a marker depending on how far along we are.
Nice.
This is to fix a problem of poor old Ryan trying to explain to people where we are in the beta cycle and where all these things are.
Mm-hmm.
And so my idea was to just make a web page that is just basically this that he can then forward on to people.
I love it.
And so that's on me to keep up to date, but I should also just add it to your release list, and then that'll automatically just keep happening. So yeah, all of that, except for this is the only manual thing on a release. In fact, I did just do a release, and one of the good things about doing a release, an update on the TypeScript website, is it forces me to update a ton of stuff. So I had to go and add a bunch of new compiler flags and things like that, because the build failed until it passed and added every compiler option and every flag. Somewhere in here is the 3.8. There we go. Which meant that like I did some new markdown files and changed a bunch of things for the TS config, as well as, if I'm going to update my dependencies, I may as well update all of them too. So yeah, this is when I added assume changes only affect direct dependencies and disable solutions. I know, right? This one's not even documented in our release notes, so I had to go and figure it out from the PR, but it's documented now on the webpage, so it's good. As well as these. So it tends to be that I go and take the release notes and then sort of try and re-describe them myself in a separate second way. This allows like different people to understand it, so there's two different ways to describe the same thing. And then there's on the TS configs reference, there's always a link back to the release that it came out with. So it tells you what version a thing came out with, and allows you to jump to like strict. Oh, it came with 2.3. So this is what's happening in 2.3, and so I can go and find like the actual information about it here as well. So it tries to provide multiple ways to explain the same thing, but at different places, so that they're at least covered in two different ways. Okay, so that's some of the automation for updating a version. I was moving towards grabbing build languages, URLs. So URL structures are kind of interesting here. So do any of those? Because I broke the URL. So if I was on this Japanese TS config page, I would want to go to the Japanese version of the playground when I clicked here. But if if there wasn't a Japanese version of the playground, then I would want it to go to the English one, which I would expect from all of these other ones. But because I broke the URLs earlier, they're not actually working, but it actually does do that. And it does that in a really strange way. The GraphQL query that we mentioned, that I showed at the beginning of this thing in the empty page here, this query asks for every single page in the website and then passes it into the layout in here. So effectively, every single page knows about every other page in the entire website, and so it can then make assumptions about what pages exist and whether it should be showing the current page as like English or is it a different language. And so it will prioritize those depending on. It's like pretty dumb code. It's just like, from English to play to Japanese, or then the other way back around. But it allows me to be able to I only write links in English, and then it can automatically get translated into whatever language is needed.
So you're using rooted paths, but you're adjusting them whenever you need for the language. Okay, I see.
So this has a list of, it's kind of, I can just show you what this looks like, because actually these get embedded inside the code as a, there we go, app data maybe? No, it's like page data. Do I need to switch between a page to do that? Ugh, no. Is that in this network? Codicon. Yeah, of course I went to Playground, the one with the most amount of information on it everywhere. Okay, so yeah, this is the response to that GraphQL query, and it gets put inside one of these files. And so you can see it's just got a list of every single file, every single page that exists on the website. These are kind of cool. I haven't really talked about them much, but for SEO now, every single Playground examples has its own individual web page that just redirects you to the Playground. So this would actually, now these will show up in Google. So when you search for something, anything inside a Playground is now actually exposed to Google as like a sort of document that you can see. It clicks through and it takes you to the Playground. So I'd have to have JavaScript disabled, I think, to be able to show it. Like that should work. Yeah. So you see briefly how it was there, and then it sent me over to a completely different page that also happened to break. I'll fix it in post, you know.
So, just a question: Are you running that query on every page load or every Playground load, or is that just like that's just in dev mode that you're making that request?
Yeah, in dev mode it's only there. So it's embedded inside it in the static one. So again,
okay.
No pages aside from the Playground, no pages require JavaScript to run.
Okay, cool.
Which is definitely like something that I've been very cautious with all the way through, because yeah, that's done.
Yeah.
Unless it's a complicated page. And like the Playground, yeah, it makes a ton of sense, but everywhere else, no.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, this is cool. All right, next up. I mentioned earlier that that there's some like loosey stuff around localizations and other people. So I use the code owners feature of GitHub, which if you've never used it, you might have seen it indefinitely typed at least. It allows you to say these folders are owned by these people, and they basically get pinged on PRs when when any of these files are changed. But the cool thing here is that I then have a bot in the TypeScript repos automation that detects if a PR has only changes to the code owners. And if it does, then it allows anyone in the code owner to automatically declare that they want that merged. So if either Sasuru, Kwame, Natural Claire, Take Pepe are in a PR that only contains changes to this or these, they can say merge this PR, and then it will get merged. And so I am completely out of the thing then, and they can just talk among each other and then say when it's time to merge, but only if every single file is inside this set of sort of globular expressions. So that gives people the sort of freedom to own their own work and to be able to do some cool stuff. All right, 10 minutes. I can get through this. All right. There's a lot. There's no asking and any time for asking in those. Because this is a massive documentation project, every single pull request has typo checks on it. So these are like, most of the time I ignore them because like Node.js or PowerShell or Ruby Dev Kit, and I slowly go and add these words bit by bit. But every single document is ran through a type checker on every single PR. So only when they're changed does it get announced in here. But there's also a way to automatically change the spell checkings. I still actually cheat and just use the Artsy spell check that I built for them, and then just move it over and automatically use it in this website and stuff as well. Another one that's really good, it's not just really good, like the spell check is good. This one is like saves my butt good. So every single PR also has Lighthouse ran against it. So this is the same tooling that like our accessibility testers use to say like these things need accessibility. So I run this now on it takes every handbook page and chooses 5 of those at random, as well as every other English page gets all of the accessibility runs done on it on every PR. The idea here being that I can keep track of like how's all these, like, how's performance running? Are we a progressive web app, which I disabled? And more importantly, like, are color contrasting things failing? So this is quite like intense, but it's enough to know that like there's a lot failing, and that was on purpose at that point. There's something kind of related to this, which is that I also have the same thing for visual regressions. So if I do a lot of work, then I don't update the snapshots, but after a while I do. So this on every PR, it shows a sort of example of a before and after for these PRs changes visually. So this is when I was adding the index. So this is what it originally looked like for iPhone, but eventually got fixed. And then this is what it looks like for tablets and stuff like that. And so this gives me a nice overview of like what's changed, how does it look like, what does it look like without JavaScript running, because this explicitly turns it off to test it. And you can see like, you know, does it still work on a phone? Does it have the correct weird navigation that's set up just for phones? And so this is a really good one for keeping track of, you know, before and afters. I use it a lot for visual regressions, which is really useful. If you're interested in pardon? Okay. Yeah, I know.
Just making sure.
It's an unexpected error because there wasn't a before, so there was only an after.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the last things that I've got for this are, as part of building this out, I ended up building a ton of new sort of tools. So one of those is the TypeScript Sandbox, which is a playground, which is, we take Monaco and then you say, what about if you have a TypeScript-oriented version of Monaco? And so it provides the sort of foundations for the playground, as well as allowing anybody to just instantly get up and running with an almost playground-like experience, but with only this much code and without any. And so this is all you need. You can copy and paste this into a HTML file, and that'll get you everywhere. And then it gives you all this like high-level API to the TypeScript compiler API. So, you know, I just want to convert this code to JavaScript. I just want the DTS for this single file. I want to make an LSP response for this one single bit here, or here are a bunch of compiler changes, editing stuff, as well as highlighting some code. Like all of these are things that I needed for the playground. So there's sort of like a kernel of the sort of Monaco editor experience in the sandbox, and then it gets wrapped by the playground. So if you think about it as anything, the little editor is all the sandbox, and then the playground is interacting with the sandbox in order to do stuff. And so that means that everyone that builds TypeScript tooling can then sort of share the same sort of features, like automatic type acquisition or being able to send links to each other. So like I can click this URL and it changes the code up here. And so that's consistent across everybody using the TypeScript sandbox, which means that, you know, we've got an ecosystem where you can send links to each other and reliably change that your code from one place to the other. You may have seen this in the playground where I added support to, if we got share somewhere in here, export. You can export to like the TypeScript AST viewer, and that's because we have the exact same URL structure now. And now anybody else, so this bit here would be the TypeScript sandbox, and he could automatically get all the AST out of it using the API in that. Then I built a 2/, which is, I barely touched upon it, but if you really long time, English tsconfig. If you look at the tsconfig, will sometimes show you sort of hover information when showing, like, so this is a really good example of it actually. This module, I didn't understand all the difference, what module does entirely until I built this page. So this just takes this code and then it just recompiles it for every single option available in TypeScript. Yeah. And the way that it does that, I know, right? That took so long for something so underwhelming. The way that it does that is by using 2/ annotation, which I basically cribbed from Ryan and then sort of improved it and turned it into like a separate library. So this one is, you know, this is a an export across two files. So there's a constants.ts file and an index.ts file, and then this should work. So does this one have? Damn it. So that should hopefully have popovers that tells you what the values are in, what types are at different places here. But you can see here that this one is just like, it's the exact same code, but it just has show emit and module common.js at the top. And that's the same for UMD, and that's the same for here. And so what this is a library for automatically doing code snippet samples. You're gonna load, which has a live version of it. So I can just put it into here, and hopefully that should just trigger this on the side, but maybe not, because
oh, if you add an X to the file name, would that help?
Maybe. Yes, it does.
Yay.
So you can see here it's created the common.js variant of the code that we had, and that gives me the ability to sort of work on this in bit by bit. So you can see here that this explicitly has raised an error, right? Because this is now a this type doesn't exist in this export here, and so I can declare that this error is like one that I actually want to show, and so now this error will be inlined inside the example. And that error will be inlined in the example in the TypeScript website too. So this is a sort of playground where you can then work to show, and it shows it all off, all the different features that like TS2/ has, which is a generic library that will run anywhere. It's called TypeScript VFS, which I cribbed from Andrew, which I turned into a proper library, which is what he used on his website. And it basically lets you just make a JavaScript map of the file name to the file content, and then pass that into TypeScript. At first, you think this is conceptually reasonably simple, but it's actually extremely complicated when you're doing it on the web, as all of these DTS files are really hard to get. It actually provides like a bunch of useful abstractions for whether you're working locally or remotely, for grabbing these DTS files from your node modules, or more importantly, grabbing DTS files from a CDN, which I set up on our Azure, depending on your target version and your something else module maybe that changes it. There's two values that can change these. I can't remember which it is, but whatever, it handles it in here. Maybe it's like your version and your target. I don't know, whatever. But this allows you to run TypeScript in a web page anywhere with the correct DTSs, which is the foundations of the stuff that people have been asking for forever on the playground. And so this is how you can create this is how you can have a TypeScript running in a web browser effectively by using TypeScript virtual file system. And then you can create your own program, and you can do your emits, and you can get your own ASTs from any files. So that was built as a part of Playground plugins. Playground plugins is this extension to the Playground where you can add your own sidebar items. I created one to prove the concept, which is it shows slides above the Playground. This is probably really not going to work at this screen size, but effectively there's now an options section in here that allows you to turn off some of the sort of features that people have been asking for, as well as to be able to toggle the only Playground plugin that has been like put in a registry, as well as adding your own custom ones, or to automatically connect to localhost 5000 to work on them. Playground plugin effectively just pulls in an extra module, and that module is allowed to has a specific format that allows you to create a sidebar like this. Let's see, I've got an existing one. If I change that, yep. So it's downloading all the stuff in the background. There we go. This is presentation mode, where I can do my slides above it, and if you check the I did it too late. This slide has actually changed the text in the playground. so I can then jump between my slides and the text as I'm giving a presentation, which is generally how people tend to do them at the New York TypeScript. So this could be my replacement for every time I have to do a talk. It can just be like, make a quick markdown file, make a gist of it. The syntax is reasonably simple. Is that the wrong link? Yeah, I lost my link. There we go. I'll just take it straight to there. Yeah, it just looks like this. And then one of them changes the text. So Playground plugins are really kind of interesting. I've got a workshop at the TypeScript New York meetup next week where I'll be guiding people through how to build their first ones and how to get started. If you're interested in like plugin infrastructure stuff, I did a write-up on all of my personal beliefs on how to build plugin infrastructures in the updates thread in this one, talking about like what templates should look like, how do you test them, how do you do documentations, because I've had to do it now for quite a few different projects like CocoaPods, Danger, and now this. And so this one actually comes with an automatic. I can run a playground from scratch in like 4 commands, I think, to get it running on, and then you can run against the production playground, so you don't even have to run the TypeScript website to do it. And all of that is just documented in that dev folder. So I'm still figuring out the right way to describe some of this stuff, but this is all you need to do to create your own Playground plugin. And you don't even have to run the website to do it. It's just an npm init command, which is a new thing. And that is a massive overview of the website. There's still some more to do. Hopefully by the end of next week, this will be ready for public seeing. And then we can do a few tests. I'll run a very heavy accessibility audit on it, and it should be hopefully fine to switch over because almost every page now is represented. Whew. Thanks. I assume you only have an hour, so if anybody has to run, if not, I can answer questions. I think I just triggered.
I have a question, and I've been keeping track of like stuff on the side, but I just want to say this is all very impressive.
Yeah.
So at the very least, I want to mention that.
Thanks. He'll come back with, why did you make Playground plugins?
Well,
what is that?
Like, at first I was like, yeah, when I first saw that, I was like, what? But as I think about it, I was kind of wondering, oh, well, what if, there's a lot of fun uses for that. Like maybe by build or something like that, if we're doing a presentation, our build presentation could be a reveal thing. And then I say, actually, this whole thing has been up in the playground itself or something like that. That would be like a cool sort of thing. And then even maybe our design meeting notes could be in a format that could work with this thing. And you could preview that in the playground too. I don't know. These are just ideas that I kind of had as you were going through this stuff.
Yeah, I have a list of all of my current ideas for Playground plugins because this is what I do, which tends to be about.
But
yeah, I'm really interested in seeing all these people that do like Lodash or Moment. All of these people should just be able to have a TypeScript Playground plugin that just jams in Moment into the runtime. And then they can have like a live environment for working with their sort of library in the playground with fully typed and with ATA and things like that. Well, there's a lot of space for really interesting work in here. It's just that this means that a lot of that interesting work doesn't have to be inside TypeScript core, and inside the website, and just is held outside.
I think that's cool.
Does 2/support JS and declaration output?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't tell you where an example is, but it supports basically every single flag in the compiler and then a few extra. So yeah, the few extras are crop this section and only show this, or It's kind of nice. The way in which I built this is a series of sort of before and after tests. So it's completely documented by itself. So it's like every test, everything has like a before, and then it turns into an after, and it shows you the JSON representation of it. So somewhere in here will be proves that JavaScript is still runnable. Oh, and these are the sort of shortcuts that you can do. So that cuts, so it only shows this, and then these are highlighted as special items in the thing. So you can see here it generates highlights and queries and static quick infos, which is what those would be. So it hides those, hides this, cuts that. It's pretty good manipulation.
Is there a way to still have, I know this might not be like, I don't know, is there still a way to have a Monaco instance on the right side of the playground? Or is that like something that you feel strongly against?
I don't feel strongly against it, but we weren't using it for anything useful. So in the sense of like,
all the editable or like interactive.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
You could, I mean,
Wait a minute.
The output.
Wait, so the right-hand side was another Monaco instance all this time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
What did you think it was?
Which makes it look nice because it matches.
It's consistent.
Yes, that was kind of what I liked about it.
But
and
like,
also,
none of the functionality on the right-hand side is actually important.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
Well, so I was thinking of a DTS maker where you paste in a bunch of JS and it says, here's your suggested DT. But you can still edit it. And then the problem is
that's
in the left-hand side is sort of immutable and the right-hand side is the mutable one.
So that's doable right now in the playground for V2. I just added some. Is it?
Well, I mean, you can paste it in JS and you can see DTS output, but you can't
Exactly. If you want to build like it would be like 2 or 3 hours with the TypeScript sandbox to generate a thing that does that. Otherwise, yeah, this should get you it.
so what's the build time like for this now?
So the CI probably takes about 10 minutes. Then the actual website itself to get started in dev mode. So it's actually running on my computer right now. Mm-hmm. It was running on my computer right now, but maybe I accidentally crashed it. Yeah, I did. Nice. Incremental builds are like less than half a second, so it'll automatically show it as you press save, basically. Wow. But from scratch, the first time, it usually takes about a minute to load up. It's not offensive. I usually just trigger it and start off running and start looking at something that I was going to go do.
Does it have on disk incremental or is it just in memory?
It's on disk incremental. So all of this lives inside a folder in the TypeScript TS2 this cache folder. So this is like a representation of all of the existing pages. Oh wait, cache. Is it hidden? Oh, it's a dot cache. So. Mm-hmm. Do they even show it here? No. What? Thanks. Can't get to it. But yeah, it's done this cache. Occasionally it's an issue, but not very often. And I've got a clean command that automatically does all that other stuff and keeps track of all these other bits and pieces. And it just generates this public folder at the end of the day. And then I audit this public folder because this is what gets shipped to GitHub that then gets shipped to Azure. Mm-hmm. And it has a bunch of these weird webpacky files, but they're all just if you're jumping between pages, which is quick instead of loading the first time. So if you're jumping between pages, it loads via JavaScript. If you're doing it the first time, it loads it via HTML. And that's what makes Gatsby extremely fast because it keeps these things in memory.
Gotcha. So here's a question. How hard was it to get Gatsby running with TypeScript?
So reasonably easy. I think at first I made a few trade-offs on strict mode and a bunch of any's anywhere. But eventually for Gatsby, I sort of wrote up a summary of how to do good TypeScript support in Gatsby. And they're rewriting Gatsby in TypeScript right now. Well, yeah, they're slowly porting over incrementally. So they are starting to have these problems themselves. So right now, I'm not happy with using TS Node, for example. But the plugin infrastructure that sets it up works pretty well. And then these Aranda recently sent me a PR to add type definitions to every single part of the Gatsby of the pages. So if you look here, we have a thing now called generated Gatsby types, and it's just one massive type thing for all of the GraphQL types and all of it.
Right.
And so the queries are now fully typed in these wild little types that.
It's code gen,
well.
right? It's code gen.
Yeah,
It's
but
definitely code gen.
Yeah.
But it's also
Generating interfaces from GraphQL. It's what people do. It's what you do.
Correct code gen?
literally.
Yeah.
I mean, I just answered my question, so no. That's code gen.
Yeah. And I'm continually improving their work. So I just sent a PR only this week that sort of adds like a base template for any page in Gatsby. So it's like you would just say this page props, and then you describe the sort of query as well as some of the like context that you get from your, like in my case, localization. And they're generally pretty. Wait, it's awaiting my response? No, it's not. It's awaiting their response. So I'll tell them that it's good to go soon. But they've been really receptive to just me shipping regular improvements. They also accept that I add huge amounts of JSDoc documentation everywhere, which makes it really easy for me to learn the API. So yeah, it's getting there, and it will be better. There's an issue specifically on making it out of the box TypeScript, because with Babel support, that's only an extra, one or two small dependencies, and then a config change here and there, and then I'll slowly delete bits and bits from this code base as they move it in-house.
Mhm.
Nice. I have a question. So on JSTS docs, we have examples of all of the refactorings and code fixes that you can do with TypeScript. Is there a catalog of those on the playground?
No. So one of the things that I did with the two releases that I've added examples for is to document those ones that came out with that version, if they're interesting. So What's New has that one didn't have any, but this one had a bunch of fixes in 3.7. So I documented them there. But I did it's actually on the roadmap to take all of those code fixes and refactors from the JSTS documents and put them in here somehow. I just haven't structurally figured out how to do that yet.
Yeah, I mean, we could just link to the playground. Like, we could change each of those markdown examples on JSTS docs to link to the playground example.
Yeah.
But that's kind of keeping them in two places, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, like, does that want to be considered? Do we want it to be user-facing documentation, or do we want it to be like us-facing documentation? And both of those could be both. But if it is, they both need different audiences, and so we'll need tweaking and figuring out where they live.
I think currently it's user-facing intended, right?
Yeah,
user-facing is definitely the goal here.
Perfect. Then we'll figure it out. It's actually on the roadmap. I have a thing specifically for this to think about it, but I haven't quite figured out what it looks like yet. But I think knowing what the code fixes are, and at least because there's so many of them and they're all invisible until it shows you, then documenting it somehow is on the main website is it's somewhere in there. Is a goal of mine. So I'd like to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll happily convert our examples that we maintain, because that's just grunt work.
Yeah.
So I don't think that doubles up with you if you're trying to do documentation for us versus users.
Yeah, that makes sense. We could probably have a new, there might be space for a new section even up here that tries to talk through code fixes, that tries to live outside of this sort of describing JavaScript, describing TypeScript section that doesn't fit with what's new. But I think that could be good. And in case people don't know, you can resize this and you can completely hide it. That used to be really annoying in
Yes.
the old playground.
Agreed.
Oh, and see logs. This was good. That should JavaScript failed to transport to run. There we go. All right, that should work. Display. Oh, it said it ran. Yeah, so it worked. I was just expecting it to not. So you can get it jamming in the bottom corner, so it should automatically scroll up. I've got some work to do on that. But also, it's really far zoomed in. No one works at it this way. Cool. Oh yeah, any more questions? Nice. All right, that was an overview. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Arda. Yeah. Take care, everyone.